Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second installment of Wisconsin Farm Bureau's Earth Week webinar series. Today, we will hear from Ben Huber. Ben is a familiar face at Farm Bureau and the General Manager and CEO of Insight FS. Ben is going to share some insights about contracts, data collection, and other considerations for farmers that are interested in pursuing carbon market opportunities. A few housekeeping notes as we get started this morning. This webinar will be recorded. I will share it out with attendees next week. We'll keep our microphones and screens off for now, but if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute to ask those questions. We want to keep this very interactive and engaging so we can all learn and grow together. So without further ado, I will introduce Ben. Ben Huber has a demonstrated history of success working in the agriculture industry. Ben has held several roles within the FS system, serving as a crop consultant, crop specialist, seed agronomist, strategic agronomy marketing manager, energy sales manager, and agronomy department manager throughout his career. In March of 2022, Ben was chosen to serve as the General Manager and CEO of Insight FS. Thank you, Ben, for joining us today. Go ahead and take it away.
Super. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think a lot of folks that are here know me and probably know my presentation style. So I'm actually sitting today for a presentation, which is weird, and you'll see a lot of hand movements, and I apologize for that, but hopefully it's not too awful distracting. I'm really hopeful to provide some information today that's around the carbon space, the opportunities that are out there, and then some of the potholes that we need to be paying attention to, whether they be mostly at the farm gate, and questions to ask of people to try to move forward and take advantage of the opportunity that carbon is offering to us today. And I wanted to start by setting this up by thinking about innovation in the marketplace and why it is that we're talking about carbon. And if you look at these companies, most of you will probably recognize them. You think about YouTube, the iPhone, and Netflix, and I have two dates on there for the established date for Netflix because the traditional, DVD in the mail started in the 90s, and then they reinvented themselves 10 years later into the streaming services that we know today. And if you think about the timeline on these, to me, it's crazy to think that 17 years ago, an iPhone didn't exist in the marketplace, and today they dominate the marketplace in the phone and digital world. And if you look at agriculture, you've got precision planting at 1993, you've got Lely at 1995, and then auto steer in 1999. Those are all revolutionary technologies that are being taken advantage of and utilized widely and broadly to a lot of extent across the farm world today. And all of them are barely of drinking age. So when I think about that, it's like, I really think that we've got something in carbon that can make a lot of sense for us. And the whole reason that we're talking about it, all the numbers that we see, this is the global companies across the US that are talking about carbon, have made carbon commitments to some level. This is the Fortune 500 companies, and of those, at the time of this was 2021 or 22, you've got 163 that have made carbon commitments, and just in the US are 42 and continuing to count. So a significant push across consumer goods to food companies to really look at carbon initiatives and reduce carbon footprint. And then not to mention what's happening with the EPA and the vehicle emission standards, things that are happening really on either coast that eventually gravitate to the Midwest, and all of the fun things that are around and built around those. So there's an awful lot that's pointing towards why should we be paying attention to carbon from a farm landscape, farm perspective, and what opportunities does that offer us to grab onto. I want to just throw this out there from the very beginning that there are a ton of moving parts inside of what I'm going to talk about today. Inside of this presentation, there are a lot of estimates and some data that's in here that are maybe 40 or 50% there to 70 or 80% there, but there's some of this that is absolutely not in stone yet. So don't take it as complete gospel that this is the route that carbon is headed. There's some clarity that we need from the government, from the carbon marketplace, in order for growers to move forward. And hopefully what we do today is stimulate some questions as this comes up that people can start asking and start trying to find some of that clarity. Some of which will be coming out well before this upcoming tax season. There are a lot of things that are going to change. I'm going to try to take a lot of this from a 30,000 foot level and maybe give a few basic things at the 30-foot level that we need to be thinking about so that we can collectively as agriculture help farmers find their way to taking advantage of some of these opportunities that some seem to be here to stick and stay, and some might be relatively fleeting. So we need to be very prepared with how to take advantage of those. Carbon programs are relatively new, and yes, they are funded through the federal government, but the focus on environmental stewardship and sustainability are absolutely here to stay. So whether it's carbon or climate smart, or pick your acronym that's going to be coming from the political world, all of the things that are inside of here and the areas of focus that we're going to talk about today really do come down to a few simple things that we can be paying attention to as agriculturalists and help us pivot into those places as those opportunities arise. So the areas of focus that I'm going to talk about today are the offset market and carbon intensity. And I'm hoping that this is relatively informal. Rachel's got a couple of questions that are kind of pre-laid in to be ready to talk about today. But I am curious, for anybody that's on this call, is there any specific area of carbon that you want to learn more about today? Because I could take the conversation and the time we spend a couple of different directions. And I'm really looking to solicit a little bit of feedback if there's anybody who says, hey, there's an area that I'd really like to hear more about today. So that's the question to the group. Is there anything that you'd like to help direct me on where maybe those questions could land? And since I know most of you, I'll just call you out, Dusty, Brenda, John, is there something specific you want to know, or is this just information that you're looking to download? Going once, going twice. Oh, there's something in chat. Perfect. You don't know enough. All right, John, you're not alone in that. That's for sure the case. The carbon markets can be complicated. So I'm going to start with the offset market and not spend a ton of time here with how offset has worked and where that's at. This conversation around offset really started about 3 years ago is when that really started coming forward on. This is the carbon credit trading. So you've got a customer and a farmer that is the creator of the carbon credit, the person who's reducing carbon in some way, shape, or form. You've got the people that are evaluating that, are the regulatory body of that, or the data house for that, and they sell that carbon that was sequestered at the farm gate to that offset buyer. And so yes, this is the people offsetting carbon paying for someone else's carbon sins and the carbon that they create from one form or another. And then if I can still click forward, I don't know why that changed. So those offset buyers, they then say, okay, this is what those dollars are worth on a per ton basis. And is it additional carbon that we're sequestering? And the verification piece that falls back into this middle group is really important to pay attention to because things like this are going to be in play. And that's a high resolution satellite image from April of 2021, so very early in the season. I highlighted 4 spots on that map. That's a place where you can see those purple areas. Those are small weed pockets already in early April that you can pick up from a satellite. So where this comes into verification is, do you think from a satellite they're going to be able to tell whether you planted a cover crop or not? Or if someone's looking at verifying for a program, can they tell if you did corrective tillage or not? That absolutely will be the case using a lot of this high resolution satellite technology that's out there today and being deployed in agriculture in a lot of different ways today. So that's something that I wanted to make sure farmers are very aware of. And then back all the way to the farm gate, those dollars per ton come to the farm gate because that farmer sequestered carbon through cover crops, reduced tillage, nitrogen management, etc. Those dollars cascade back to the farm gate in the offset market. So that's really selling the carbon that you produce. This market is very supply driven. It's the reference point for carbon ag value. The crazy part about this is that carbon value in 2022 was $20 a ton. In 2024, carbon is trading for over $60 a ton. And a lot of that has to do with that first slide that I had out there that showed folks that are very invested in reduction of carbon in their publicly traded and committed businesses. As time goes on and we get closer to the dates that they are committed to those meeting those offset dates, carbon is more valuable. So when you're looking at the offset market, you want to make sure that you're working with a company or that you're working with a trading house that allows you to take advantage of the market appreciation that carbon will see and has seen to this point. You know, if you were enrolled in 2022 in one of the very early infancy carbon programs that was locked in at a static rate per acre, you are leaving dollars on the table today because you are enrolled in a program that did not allow for appreciation in the carbon market to cascade back to the farm gate. So when I say not all programs are created equal, that's what I'm talking about in the offset world. You really want to be paying attention to how those dollars come back, what are the verification levels that need to be there, how often does that happen, and then what does the payment process look like? Because in a lot of these, there's a pretty good lag in the offset market for payments that are coming back to the farm gate. And that's what this very busy slide is trying to illustrate. And a lot of it just simply comes down to farmers are going to get paid 12 months-ish after they have sequestered that carbon. So when you think about new enrollments into the offset program, you've got the growing crop, you've got verification, and then issuance of those credits are somewhere in that 12-month time frame. And then you're enrolling into the very next crop at the same time while those offsets are being created. So that first year is where you're going to have the most lag. And then once you get into the program, if you stay enrolled in that program, those payments are not, that lag is going to shrink up really probably by at least 2 quarters, maybe even 3 quarters through the year, with how this is the Indigo model that they use and that we've worked with a little bit on the FS side of the world to try and tiptoe our way into the offset market. So that is a really quick and dirty overview of the offset market and carbon. Are there any questions related specifically to offset, or I'm going to transition over into carbon intensity and then how that starts to work and some of the newness that's around carbon intensity. So any questions on offset? All right, onward and upward. Why this doesn't want to click forward all the time for me, but
We do have a question in the chat, Ben. How
sure.
do farmers find these programs to participate in?
The easy smart aleck answer is Google, because you'd find there's probably 8 to 10 different programs that exist in the offset market today. So one of the biggest things that I would probably, or where I'd really point farmers towards would be folks in the industry that are working with it, whether that's us or that's the NRCS. Or it's some of these specific people that there are specific companies that are working inside of these programs. That's really where I'd point you today. There's not some type of carbon clearinghouse that you can go to. You literally can do a Google search and start to see all the different programs that are out there. What I would definitely try to point farmers towards are programs that are twofold. One is, like I said earlier, they allow for those dollars, higher percentages of dollars as carbon becomes more valuable to come to the farm gate, step one. And step two would be a company that is affiliated with a registry. If they are tied into a registry, that means there's some level of a regulatory body that is generally affiliated with the federal government looking at their carbon program and their algorithm and saying, yes, this is a legitimate registry. If you think about accounting, there are generally accepted accounting principles. The registry for carbon is very similar to what I would call generally accepted accounting principles, where we follow a standard set of rules and we allow for a certain standard set of outcomes. That's why the registries are important. So those are probably the 2 factors that I would point folks towards in the offset market. So if I can figure out how to click ahead, there we go. So I'm going to move over into carbon intensity, and inside of carbon intensity is where the water gets a little bit more muddy in terms of where things are at in the carbon world today. So I'm gonna go through quite a bit of information. Some of it we know for sure. Some of it we are making a couple of assumptions based on some of the indications we're getting from the government and from some of the legislation that came forward here over this last year. But there's definitely some finality that we need to that in order for things to proceed, whether they be at an ethanol plant, or they be at a biofuels plant, or they be at the farm gate. So I'll try to cover that as we go. Very simply, carbon intensity is the amount of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per unit of activity. So it's how much carbon did it take to produce, in this case, a bushel of corn. Inside of the carbon intensity conversation today, there are really two things that are being very heavily looked at. And then the feed market, the beef and dairy market, those are kind of a separate carbon intensity score. And there's a lot less clarity on those today. So I'm going to focus our time really specifically on grain and ethanol and why this is rolling forward the way that it is. So when we talk about carbon intensity for grain, think about it as the CI score on how much carbon is used to produce a bushel of corn based on a model that's being used and accepted today. And then on the carbon intensity for ethanol, think about it as the amount of CO2 that's required to produce a megajoule of energy, or eventually you get to the gallon of ethanol. So that's the basic outline that we'll follow today. The model that I talked about that's being looked at as the most accepted way of measuring carbon intensity across the industry and will be tied into the infrastructure bill looks to be the GREET model. And that is something that I could probably spend a whole hour just going through the GREET website and helping you understand how that comes together. Basically, what I would tell you is think of the GREET model as the way to calculate the score using the fuel chain from pump through the well to the pump at the gas station to the wheels that are using it, and then grain production from the infancy to the ethanol plant. That's really how I would encourage you to look at that GREET model today. And this is what, as we reference some numbers later, this GREET model is where some of those numbers are coming from, and using the carbon intensity score coming out of GREET to help extrapolate us into what's this worth in the marketplace. So this is the model that today looks like the U.S. government is going to use for clarifying carbon intensity inside of the 45Z tax credit program that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So here's the model of the fuels market, looking at CI scoring from the farmer, selling corn to the grain elevator, potentially selling corn from the grain elevator or from the farmer into the ethanol plant, right? I mean, some folks are also doing that. This is one area where we do need a little bit more clarity on what ethanol plants and how some of those things are going to work and operate. And as I've talked to some of those folks in the marketplace, they're looking for some more clarity coming out of the 45Z tax credit side before we know if this is a linear line or how this needs to work. But bottom line is this ethanol producer is very, very incentivized today to get their carbon intensity score underneath of 50, because using that GREET model, if they're at 50 and above, they do not qualify for these tax credits. If they are at 50 and below, they start to qualify for a significant tax credit per gallon of ethanol produced that will come back to that specific ethanol plant. So that grain goes through that ethanol plant, that refinery. There's a tax credit, whether it be through the 45Z infrastructure bill or RIN credits that are pretty popular inside of the fuel world today, and how those change. Those dollars come back to the ethanol plant, and then those dollars cascade either back through the grain elevator that sold the corn, or directly to the farmer if the farmer sold the corn directly to the ethanol plant. That happens. All different variations of that happen all over the state. And one of the biggest things and pieces of feedback that we're getting today is that from an ethanol producer's perspective, that grain sourcing and data collection piece are something they're not overly interested in. They've got enough that they're what they're trying to do, running their ethanol business. That this data collection piece on by farm, by field, that they're not overly interested there, and they're not real sure how to accomplish some of that. And all of that data is going to end up being a credit back, can cascade to a credit back to the farm gate that's related to some of those same things of cover crops, reduced tillage, nitrogen management. That get back to the farmer. And so thinking about, as you think about this, if I have an ethanol plant that is got a CI score of 50, and I am a corn producer selling them corn with a CI score that helps improve the CI score of the ethanol plant, that is valuable to that ethanol plant, right? So they're incentivized to cascade those tax credits to the farm gate. And it very much feels like that's the route that group is going to take. It's really figuring out the pathway that we're trying to accomplish is where some of those questions arise. Some of the renewable fuel categories that are inside of this tax credit that's at our doorstep to be effective January 1 are renewable diesel. So some of you here have heard me talk about renewable diesel a little bit. A lot of us know there's a large soy crush plant destined for the southern part of Wisconsin, hopefully, in an effort to help that refiner produce additional renewable diesel into the marketplace. That would qualify underneath of these 45Z tax credits, along with ethanol in the renewable fuels category. And that's really what it's looking like today. IRS, it's $1 a gallon coming back through 45Z is for anything that starts with under 50. At that ethanol plant level. So that's really what's really driving this. There's a significant amount of dollars that are looking at coming back to those ethanol plants, and they need to get to that CI score of 50 and very motivated to go less than that. So how do we get there? Why does this matter to farmers that are on this call or farmers that would see this presentation? That GREET model. So if you take the GREET model, you just take the average corn crop today. This is the average US corn crop on what it takes. And you can see there, I've got yield, our nitrogen rate, our P&K rate, and our lime rate. All of those things calculate into or are put into the GREET model in various ways. Using conventional tillage and no cover crop, our CI score on that grain today is 31.2 using the GREET model as we know it today. If I take this GREET model and I modernize it a little bit to where we're looking at corn yields and trying to shoot for in bigger corn production areas, whether they be in Illinois, Iowa, or Wisconsin, we bump the N rate a little bit, we bump the P&K rate a little bit. Lime is more in line with what we see in historical averages, and then we look at our yield factors of 200, 225, and 250. So those are the different yield categories that we penciled in here just to be able to see the differences in how each impacts that CI score. So yield is a big component inside of CI for grain. Reducing yield inside of CI scoring does not really help you as a producer because it's carbon used per unit of output and yield being the output. So that yield number needs to at least stay consistent, if not try to grow based on the other management factors that you're going to try to deploy to reduce your overall CI score. So if you take this top one, we look at conventional tillage, no cover crop at those nitrogen rates, our CI score at 200 bushel corn is 30.2 using the GREET model. If I just flip over and do no-till, no cover crop, I drop that by 6 points. So that's a 6-point change. So my grain grown with a no-till and no cover crop rotation drops me 6 points. If I do conventional tillage, but I add a cover crop from our baseline of 30, that actually drops us a little bit more significantly than just flipping over to no-till. So the no-till deployment is worth about 6 inside of the GREET model CI score at 200 bushel corn, and the cover crop is worth 8 to 9 inside of that same model. But then when you deploy no-till and cover crop, you drop significantly when you start to layer those practices together. And I think this is something that's pretty important inside of the whole carbon intensity conversation and regenerative practices conversation, is that the GREET model and CI scoring as we see it today as a points toward ethanol is going to allow a grower to be very flexible in the things that they do, and very flexible in how they deploy these things at the farm gate at the field level. Each field, if I have 1,000 acres and I've got 10 fields in that 1,000 acres, and yeah, that's not Wisconsin farming, but I have 10 fields in that 1,000 acres, I've got 10 different CI scores, and my aggregate is what I'm going to be selling to the ethanol plant, right? For the grain that I'm going to market. So there's a lot of variables that come into play here. There's several that we didn't even talk about that go into variable rate nitrogen, variable rate P and K, how those factors play into the GREET model. You could run all kinds of different scenarios here and have a spreadsheet full of different by field scores based on what you did with all of those different practices. And that's going to play into the whole data conversation we're going to have here in just a couple of minutes as to why it's so important to track all of this information geo-referenced at the field level, because this is where it's going to come in and going to matter. So what's it worth? So if you take those tax credits in the incentives that are forecast coming through the 45Z tax incentive bill, and you take those to a dollar per acre value to the ethanol plant. I want to emphasize that these calculations you're going to see are the dollar per acre value to the ethanol plant. What gets to the farm gate is going to be up to the individual ethanol plant and how that works and operates. And those are the points of clarity that we don't have today. So this is the don't hold me to it part. This is, I'm doing math saying this is what this is worth to the ethanol plant. How do we collectively try to get more of this to the farm gate? So total value today on that CI score to an ethanol plant to be below 50 is about a nickel per score reduction per bushel of corn that they buy. So you've got to be below 50 at that ethanol plant. So if we just raise yield, that's worth 1 point from one to the next. I'm using the chart that I had before. That's worth about $10.80 an acre to that ethanol plant. If I deploy no-till at those 6 points at a nickel per CI per bushel reduction, that gets you to $64 an acre. If I'm using a cover crop, that's my 9 points at $97 an acre. And then when I use no-till and cover crop, deploy it together, and I reduce my CI score by 21 points, that ethanol plant, the grain to that ethanol plant is worth $226 an acre to that ethanol plant if they're already under 50 and they want to keep trading that down, because that's what they're incentivized to do, is keep their CI score below 50 and trending down below 50. That's how I get to the math that's on this page. So there is definitely some significant value to that ethanol plant to buy grain that's deploying some of those things that we've been talking about earlier here today. So I want to pause there to see if there are any questions of any kind from this particular group, whether you want to come off mute or chat, whatever, it's up to you. But that's the dollar value that's cascading towards ethanol. So any questions or comments around that?
I have more of a comment, but I kind of noticing a trend that as production increases, as you're being more efficient, that is an overall good impact. I mean, we see similar things with the dairy cow. When our production increases, our methane emissions per pound of milk is also decreasing. So I'm seeing a very similar efficiency trend in corn production.
Correct. So the spreadsheet that's driving all of this, I've got 75 lines of different scenarios that are inside of this spreadsheet that created these. And one of the biggest factors in there is reducing the amount of nitrogen that you use while increasing the amount of yield that you have on output. So nitrogen use efficiency. That is something that hasn't really ever seen a credit necessarily that can end up back to a farmer and a farm gate, but that's one of the best ways for a farmer to maximize their profitability on a farm is to grow more by being more efficient with less, right? Sounds pretty basic, but it's very hard to execute. And that's why, that's why these are all tracked by farm and by field, because there are going to be certain farms and fields that certain practices just don't fit. And when you start to think about the amount of data and information by field collection that is going to be necessary, it is significant for a farmer to be able to have that at their fingertips at a couple clicks of a button, boom, to that end user, whether it be an ethanol plant or it be a food company who's buying carbon credits.
Dusty added a question in the chat. What should farmers be aware of when signing up for a contract?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring that one back up in a couple of minutes, Dusty, because there are several things to be thinking about when it comes to that. The first one currently being today, no ethanol. If there is an ethanol plant in the industry that's saying I'm going to, or really anybody in the industry, grain outlet, that's saying I'm going to pay you more for a lower CI scored grain, as we sit here today on what, April 24th, there is not enough clarity in that 45Z tax law to come anywhere near what that looks like. The numbers that I'm showing you here today are all in the proposal phase as 45Z gets finalized at the federal level. So if somebody today is saying, hey, sell your corn to me and I'll get you another nickel on every bushel you sell me, that's probably something that they'll back up. And there's probably more you can get. I would wait till we know what 45Z looks like. The other very common question that I've gotten on this particular slide when we're talking about tax credits is that we know tax credits are not infinite. And today the 45Z tax bill has a 3-year lifespan without an extension. Now, we've seen tax credit extensions on multiple things, multiple different industries, businesses, consumer levels. And that is something that as we have more clarity on what this looks like, that I think that if we start to see this really materialize well in the marketplace, that's something that we'd love to see extended, right? And some of that I draw back to the reference of nutrient management, in particular in Wisconsin, where we saw and have seen over time, over the 20-year life of the focus on nutrient management and some of those farm gate incentives and tax credits that have come out through the nutrient management world, that those really do drive behavior and they change behavior and for the better. And that's why I think this model will fit, and I think that this will stick and stay for a little while, because there's a lot of things that are very much advantageous for the whole supply chain here, whether you're talking the consumer at the very far end of the supply chain, the ethanol plant in the middle, and the farmer who initiates the carbon sequestration and the changing of practices on how we grow food or how we grow grain for milk or for meat. So there's a lot along that chain, but they are definitely tied to tax credits, and it is definitely not infinite as we sit here today, which is why it's so important to really think about how do we take advantage of this carbon opportunity that may be a short-term window with some serious dollars tied to it, that if we don't take advantage of it, we'll see it go away because it didn't drive what was trying to be done. So how do we take advantage of this opportunity? Really comes down to a couple of different things, and this is about as easy as I could boil it down with the agronomic impact areas that a farmer wants to and should be thinking about. You've got carbon removal, and the obvious carbon removal is the use of cover crops. And the deploying those in different ways, again, by field. Everything is what happens in a georeference field boundary, and collecting data that says in that georeference field boundary, I did these things. And so cover crops is one of those, and it can be using as applied planter maps. It can be high-res aerial imagery of that growing cover crop after it's been planted, so on and so forth. So that's probably the number one carbon removal piece to be looking at and using today. And then you've got two specific categories on carbon avoidance. One of them is probably a little more broad than others, and it's the first one is nutrient management. So just nutrient management in general. I talked about those reduced nitrogen rates while being able to maintain yield or increase yield. So increasing nitrogen use efficiency, that can be done in a variety of ways, between split applying nitrogen, using nitrogen stabilizers, multiple different kinds of nitrogen stabilizers to try to keep that plant available nitrate in the soil profile for longer during the growing season. the industry's been dabbling in the biological end sources space, and you've started to see a couple of different practices start to separate their way out in there. Not probably a one size fits all just yet today, but definitely as a piece to supplementing how we reduce our total commercial nitrogen use and maintain yield. There definitely is a play inside of there with the biological end world. And then variable rate practices, whether it be the variable rate side of nitrogen or it be P and K, deploying combinations of those nutrient management strategies are going to help lower that CI score inside of the model that's being used today, and will make that grain more valuable to an ethanol plant or a grain outlet that's looking to lower their CI score by buying a product with a lower CI score itself. And then we have the one that's probably the age-old tried and true in carbon avoidance, is going to more reduced tillage or no tillage. And there again, by the field boundary. So of the things that we can track today and the data that we can track today in a geo-referenced format, that tillage pass is probably the one that has the least amount of data collection with it, along with the use of cover crops, especially as applied planter data. Those seem to be the ones where there's some gaps. The nutrient management, carbon avoidance side, there's a lot of different ways that folks can track that information. It's really a matter of, do we have good, clean data and information by a field boundary to be able to let this algorithm do its work and come up with an accurate CI score that's representative of what's going on at the farm gate. And that's where I click to this. If there's one thing that folks remember today about this entire conversation, is that carbon is really the convergence of data and teamwork at the farm gate to really make all of these different pieces come together. And it all starts with accuracy at the field boundary level. And as someone who, through most of my agronomic career in the farming world that I live in today, in production agriculture in Northern Illinois, I would tell you that field boundaries is probably one of the hardest things. And we think it should be simple. It's one of the hardest things to maintain data integrity. And it all matters what happens inside of that field boundary. So that's why everything starts there. And if it doesn't happen inside of that field boundary, quite honestly, the modeling that's being used, regardless of what it's being used for, simply doesn't care. So you've got to be able to have good, tight, accurate field boundaries. You get those field practices and yield. All of these blue variables that are going on at the farm gate need to flow into a data platform, and preferably a singular data platform that has the ability to then take that information and spit it back out in multiple different directions, preferably digitally. This is not looking at our father and grandfather's planner book, using those field practices and importing them into a manual boundary somewhere and then trying to spit these out. That's not doing that. That's a massive amount of time, massive amount of inaccuracy that would be involved in that process. So this is collecting it all as we go into multiple, these are going to have multiple ways that we're collecting all of that data, but putting it into a singular platform that can then spit out those data-driven agronomic decisions that flow back into what's going on inside of that field boundary. We can connect it to a CI platform. So the one that we're using today is connected to Indigo. That's the company that FS and Growmark has partnered with today, to be able to take that grower information inside of this data platform, spit it into their model so that can be connected to these carbon assets, the grain assets, and then the origination piece. So all of this is definitely interconnected with one another. And this is about as simply as I can boil down how important it is to have all those data collection pieces talking and speaking to one another. And if any of you have ever planted corn or ever harvested corn, this is one of the hardest things to make happen when rain's coming and you're trying to hammer corn in or take grain out. And these are some of the things that tend to gap and to fall apart. And then going back to fix those things later can be done, but it's definitely an effort in futility in some cases if you lose information completely, and can take hours upon hours to make it all get back into the right field boundary at the data integrity level that's going to be required for carbon intensity scoring and for some of the grain management pieces that are going to come along with those connections to ethanol plants. So No matter what market you choose, no matter if it's the offset market, if it's the current CI market, if it's program X, Y, and Z that comes out in 3 years because something changed and here's a new look. Farmers really need to concentrate on these top 2 levels and partnering with the right people that can help them inside of these top 2 levels so that it can be as easy and painless as possible to get into and share with some of these other ones if they choose to take advantage of some of those opportunities that are coming their way. So I will pause there again to see if there are any questions around that.
Just to reiterate this data collection piece, Ben, we have those 3 buckets of field boundaries, field practices, and yield. What would you say is like the single most important piece of data that farmers could start collecting now? And what is the most reliable equipment to try to grasp that data?
So on the, I'll take the easy question first. On what equipment to use, you want to make sure you're working with whatever color you have. It's green, it's red, it's yellow, it's blue, it's mixed, whatever. Just make sure that you are able to accurately collect that field level information and that it is shareable into a data platform that accepts those colors. And because the ones that aren't are much more difficult to work with, and there's much more data cleaning time that it takes to be able to get to the integrity level that we're talking about down here for all these CI scores. So when I talk about this data platform here in the middle, nutrient management has helped us an awful lot along the way with data collection, but a pile of that is manual collection of that information and importing it into a spreadsheet. This is not that. This is seamless. This is seamless data sharing, file sharing, and it needs to be that in order for this to be able to work at scale. That's going to be essential. So it's working with those providers, seeing who they're connected to, working with what I would hope is somebody in this data platform area that maybe helps direct that a little bit, and start to narrow some of that up. The most important pieces for collection really fall into these 3 buckets of you got to have your field boundaries and you got to have them high and tight on everything you do inside of that boundary. And if you change them, you need to edit them, and you need to be doing that in a proactive manner. So not as you're changing the field boundary with a field finisher or with a planner, but before you do that, so that we can be more proactive than reactive in this data space. Every field practice that you do needs to be geo-referenced to that farm or field in some way, shape, or form. Satellite imagery will help with some of those verification pieces for sure, but nothing beats as applied data going through a rate controller or going through a planner monitor that's geo-referenced to the field when you're doing it. So every field practice that we touch, we need to be able to layer inside of that. And then certainly yield. And this is probably one of the ones that gets the most flack because the harvest window is wider than the planting window. And if someone's got a really nice sunny day in October and November, they want to be harvesting their crop. And if they are waiting on a technology delay because a mouse chewed a cord somewhere in a hornet's nest of wiring harnesses, the patience level of a farmer does not go very well. And I'm speaking from experience in that exact category. That is sometimes, hey, you know what? Let's go. We can still harvest it. We just can't track it. Well, if we don't have the output on that particular field or farm, that is going to be out for some of these programs that are down here below. So being able to have the patience and the equipment to do the right things and track everything that's in these 3 buckets is pivotal to success to get it to this data platform that we can get back out. The next piece that I'd have you look at here is where are we on the adoption curve? This is anecdotal. This is Ben Huber's opinion of where I think we are today inside of this world. And you guys have probably seen this technology adoption curve over time, where you've got the guy here on your bicycle and your pitfalls along the way, and success is somewhere over here. Time is not linear. That's probably some of these dips are probably months, weeks, or years. You never know, right? Until you find success. And today, I think our offset markets are sliding slightly ahead of the carbon intensity side, just because they've been around longer. Like I said, there's 3 years that we've been working to find some clarity in the offset world. And I think we're in a pretty good spot there. Carbon intensity is over here just at the takeoff line and really probably not even taking the leap just yet because of some of the things we don't know inside of the tax credit world. But I am confident that we're going to see that clarity as we come through this summer and into early fall, because the 24 crop that's being planted is going to be eligible for carbon intensity scoring at the ethanol plant by January 1 of 2025. That's when those credits go into effect. So the crop that we're about to plant is going to have a CI score that's going to be eligible for whatever the program looks like when it comes out. So that's why, back to that data slide I just showed you, being able to, the folks that are going to be able to do this and execute this today are going to have a competitive advantage to those around them at the farm gate, because of all of that information being able to maybe take off here a little quicker than the folks that haven't gotten down to the data collection side just yet. So that data collection at the field level, geo-referenced, is hands down the number one piece that you got to grab. I do think that if you choose the right way to go about it, because the CI scoring today is really only tied to the corn crop, so you feasibly could have people that have their corn acres enrolled in a carbon intensity program with their end user, whether it be an elevator or an ethanol plant, and then you're going to have their rotational acres on whatever other crops those are, could potentially be in an offset, and then you're going to shift those as time goes. And there again, back to Dusty's question, in what provider are you selecting? You want to be able to select a provider in that arena that has the flexibility to go in and amongst programs, because their data lake has the flexibility to do that. Today in the marketplace, there are only a couple that really can do that and do it at any level of accuracy and competency. And one of them, not to make it an Indigo commercial, but one of them is Indigo. That's why we partnered with Indigo for that specific reason. They have the most flexibility inside of their program. And I do think that CI could leapfrog what the offset is looking like potentially in a big way. If it doesn't leapfrog it, it's going to continue to drive that price of carbon up in that offset marketplace, because there's now competition for where are those acres going to get enrolled and how important are they. So looking at how all those things are intertwined with one another is definitely a challenging conversation. And it's something that as we kind of close up today, I want folks to think about. Carbon is definitely an opportunity, and to be successful in this space, we've got some proven track record with nutrient management and the adoption of conservation practices, in particular here in Wisconsin, that are so different than the states that are around us. Wisconsin is light years ahead of Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota in this whole CI space. As a collective. And so I think we've got a really cool opportunity to maybe set the pace here for how farmers can adopt quickly and take advantage of those credits as they come forward. There's no individual market that's perfect. Rented versus owned could be different. Rotational differences are going to be there. Like I said earlier, you got to partner with that flexible program. CI is incredibly new with a ton of variables, and I go back to my disclaimer. I am not the be-all end-all expert in this space. I'm just telling you what we know from our perspective today, and I can tell you right now, I have a meeting next Tuesday and another one next Friday. It might change some of what I talked about here today, because both are with ethanol plants that are trying to figure out where this goes and what can be done. So there's a lot that's going on, a lot of moving pieces. And what I tell a lot of farmers is stay connected to it, pay attention, try to avoid some of the noise and some of the, what I would probably call the tough partners that are in this space. Don't take the easy bait. If something sounds like it is too good to be true, it probably is in this space. So don't sell that carbon short for what its value really is, and the amount of work that it takes to make those management decisions, make those management changes at the farm gate. The last thing you want to do is hop in, take the easy bait, and all of a sudden the carbon market goes to $100 a ton, or the CI market is 10 cents a bushel with how these credits fall out. It could be very significant, and you could get lost in that. So crawl before you walk, ask a lot of questions, pick the right partner in the data side, picking the right partner in the CI and the score side. And I think this can be really successful for a farmer in the state of Wisconsin. But there's a lot to do, a lot to think about, and I'd certainly entertain any additional questions that folks have, and happy to talk about whatever you'd like for the next couple of minutes. I finished with 2 seconds to spare, Rachel. I can't believe it. Look at that.
Right on time. Impressive.
Wow. Any last questions, I guess, from folks?
Just one more to tee up from me, Ben, is that sharing your data piece with these external partners. I know you talked about having a single platform to collect, but then when it comes to sharing that out, how should farmers be doing that and protecting themselves and sharing that data?
So that's a wonderful question. Because if you share the wrong thing, the wrong place, your information is now someone else's information, and they have all the rights to that data. So today that comes down to some of those questions that you need to ask of those specific people, whether it's somebody that's at the farm gate helping you collect data and information, or it's the provider that is connecting your information to the whatever end user market we're talking about. It's asking that specific question of who owns this data and information. Can you show me the intellectual property agreement that lays that out? If they're making you sign a contract on something to be a part of a program, the first thing that I would do is consult someone that has a legal background to be able to make sure you're not giving something away that you don't want to be, and that you're not signing your rights away to something. So, we've worked pretty hard to educate folks around a lot of that, and it's really it's being connected to the right people, asking the right questions, and don't take that easy win in this space, because there are some bad actors in this space, and others, but there's definitely some bad actors in this space that farmers want to pay attention to, and you wouldn't want to get trapped by. Anything else? Dusty, I can't believe you don't have a question. Well, with that, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate people hopping on. I'm hopeful that it was valuable and informational, and if folks want to continue the conversation anyway, there's my contact information, and if I'm not the right person, I'll connect you to who is.
Thank you very much, Ben, for sharing all of your expertise and knowledge about this carbon space. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. Our final Earth Week webinar will be on Friday at 11. We will hear from Dan Christensen from PepsiCo on how a company up the supply chain is working with farmers in this space. Just a final shout out as we wrap up. Insight FS is the exclusive partner of Wisconsin Farm Bureau's 35 Under 35 program. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Ben and the team at Insight for their support, and remind each of you to nominate a YFA member for 35 Under 35. Those nominations are open now, and they will close on June 1st. You can visit the Wisconsin Farm Bureau website for more information. So with that, thank you. I hope everyone is enjoying their Earth Week and the beautiful weather that we have as we dive into planting season. And hopefully I will see many of you again on Friday.
Have a great day.